So we know what a great technique applique can be, and how you can replace stitches with fabric and create texture and create a lot of dimension in a design. We also know it can be a little bit complicated. You've got an input or a locator stitch, you've got tack down, you've got a cover stitch, and if you edit any of those, you have to edit the other ones too. So if I move my locator stitch, I've got to move my tack down to line up with it, and that's a lot of things to keep track of. Totally doable, but let's look at an easier way to do it, which is the applique input method, which as you digitize with one tool, you can move any of those pieces and you will move all of them together. And if you want to separate them, you can again after you're done. So let's take a look at just the applique technique itself, how it works, and then we'll look at how to actually use the applique input method. So on screen, I have an applique design. It's the same design that I used in digitizing applique manually, where we digitized each piece separately using a walk normal and a single line column and all of that good stuff. And if I wanted to edit one of those pieces, again, I can move my locator stitch out here, but then I have to come in and I have to move my, and there goes my tack down, and then I gotta, with the cover and make sure everything, and no, I don't have that kind of patience. So what we can choose to do instead, if we have the upper levels of software, is use the applique input method. So on this next project, I just have that same artwork that we've been working with in the other video. And this time I'm going to use not the complex fill, but if I click and hold for half a second, I get the flat. If I go over to this little heart, it's the applique input method. And when I select it, I get one option up above, which is this bright green background color. You could change it, but I'm going to leave it for a minute. And I'm going to scroll up, and to digitize an applique with the applique input method, you do it just like a complex fill, in that you trace around it. If you have a hole, you give it that, and then you're done. You don't even have to worry about stitch directions or anything like that. So if I trace around my design, hit enter, asks if I have any holes. So if I have a hole, I can do that. Hit enter, it's asking for another one. I don't, I hit enter, and I'm done. So I have all of those pieces that make it up. If I look through slow redraw, here we go. So you see my locator stitch, and then my tack down, and then my cover, and then it's done. And if I go into the properties of that, in the general properties, you have a few things. One, you have your background color. You have the option of making it solid, none, crosshatch, or a graphic, so you could take a photo of your fabric or scan it in and put that in the background. Now, scaling is going to be a little bit off, but at least it gives you some sort of idea. I typically leave it as a solid color, and then I choose from this palette whatever is the closest. If I want to mix to make it perfect, I can go to more colors and I can mix and get down to what I really want it to be and change all my sliders to get it just the way that I want it. I'm going to choose just red for now. Hit OK, hit apply, and it changes to red. And when it's selected, it goes to crosshatch, but when it is grayed out, it goes back to solid, so no stress there. All right, so let's go back and look at the other things. The next thing that we have is color change enable. That means that the tack down and the cover stitch, the locator stitch, the very first stitch, and the tack down are going to be different colors. I really struggled to come up with a good reason to not have them be separate colors, because if they're the same color, it will sew the locator stitch and then just immediately start in the tack down, and you have to stand there by the machine, make sure that's done, press the button, and then lay it down. I don't want to do that. I want it to be separate colors. That way when I go to the machine, I can say, okay, here's my locator stitch color, and then I can put in an applique command, then I can put in the rest of the colors. And so when it sews out, it'll sew my locator stitch, and then it will stop. It will move the frame out so I can carefully take my time, place my material down, get it all lined up, double check it, stand back from the machine, make sure my fingers are away from any sharp things, and then press the green button and let it go ahead and sew that tack down. So I like to have those be separate colors. I really can't come up with a good reason not to, unless you're using it in a very non-traditional manner where perhaps you are using it for just using the tool for just the locator and the color of the fabric, and you're doing the tack down and cover stitch manually separately, which is something I do only when I am layering up a bunch of different appliques or doing something just a little bit weird. For my standard applique stuff, I always leave that enabled. All right, so the next thing that we have is, do you want a tack down enabled? Again, I have a really hard time figuring out why I would want to disable this. For my tack down stitch, I don't want to just trust that my fabric's going to stay on my garment. I want to actually tack it down around the outside, so I enable this. The next one down is your object type. What kind of object do you want it to be? Do you want it to be a walk, or do you want it to be a column? So do you want that inset walk look, or do you want it to be a column? I typically do column, but it's up to you what look you want. If it's a column, what width do you want it to be? And then where do you want it to fall? Do you want the majority of it to the inside with a little bit to the outside? Yes, probably. So those defaults will work fairly well for you. Now, here's one that is, in my opinion, completely optional, but I tend to like it. Enable color change after tack down. So between my tack down and my cover stitch, do I want to have an applique command or the ability to add one at the machine? So do I want my tack down and my cover stitch to be two different color blocks so that in between at the machine I can put an applique command in, have it feed the frame out, and I can check and see, did I catch all the edges of my material? Yes. Is there a piece sticking out that I need to trim up? I can check all of that before hitting go and then going back in and sewing the cover. So it's just a way for me to double check, lower my stress level, make sure that everything's looking really nice. All right, below that you have your cover stitch. Is it enabled? Yes or no? That is totally up to you. If you're doing a more exposed, decorative, or tackle twill type look, you may want to uncheck that. And if you want to cover it up with satin stitches, go ahead and leave that enabled. What width do you want it to be? A little bit bigger than your tack down is always nice. And then where do you want it to fall along that line? Just falls right below that. So we're looking right down here, and we've got a lot of options. Now, any of the properties for those specific stitch pieces are over on the left. So for my outline, my locator stitch, what type of stitch do I want it to be? Typically I want it to be a walk. And then what stitch length do I want it to be? So smaller stitches are going to follow forms better, larger stitches are going to be easier to tear out. There for a while, it was really popular to have applique where the edges were exposed so that they could fray. So you would tack it down with a slightly inset walk, you'd let the edges fray a little bit, and when I did that, I would either have my locator stitch match the color of my fabric, or pardon me, my garment really, really well, or I would pull the stitches back out. So after it was done and tacked all the way down, I would go to the back side and pull the bobbin for just my locator stitch and then pull the stitches out of the front. And when I did that, I would make this stitch length much longer, like a 40 or a 50 point, so that it was much easier to do. So that's when I would go in and change those. All right, so the next thing that we have is our tack down, and this will change depending on what kind of object you wanted your tack down to be. We are using a column, so we have stitch types for a column. We could do a tackle, or we could do an E-stitch, or a zigzag. All of those would be good tack downs. Again, the point of a tack down is to attach the fabric as quickly as possible without moving it. So those are going to be the ones that I tend to choose for that. Top stitching, what kind of stitch do you want? I'm going to choose auto density for this, hit apply. And then the other thing we might want to consider is what kind of corners do we want. So for the tack down, we've got a miter style too. I might want to increase when it happens, so I could change those degrees so it happens a little more frequently and I mimic that traditional sewing machine kind of look. And then the other one that we can do is we can change the corners on the cover stitch, so you could have it be a cap or a miter depending on what you're looking for. All right, so now that we've gone through all of those kind of properties and gotten into a good amount of trouble with them, let's go ahead and actually digitize using the Applique input method. So I'm going to select my tool and I'm going to digitize around this shape. I'm going to zoom in here because I have a hard time digitizing when I'm zoomed out so far. And I am using the scroll wheel on my mouse to scroll up and down. I hold Control to pan left and right. I'm also choosing to hold Alt to snap this line into 15-degree increments. I am not doing that at the same time. So if I am holding Control to pan, I am not holding Alt, and vice versa. Here I gotta let go of everything because I gotta get into this corner. And that does not fall on that 15-degree increment, so I've got to let go of Alt. Now we're back to snapping, so the Alt key is pressed down. I am trying to go fairly quickly but still be relatively accurate. You guys can take all the time you need to be as accurate as you need to be. Unless you have the client standing over your shoulder, in which case don't get nervous, you'll be fine. Just be accurate. All right, now that I'm done, I'm going to hit enter to complete the shape. It's asking, do I have any holes on the bottom line? No, so I hit enter and now I've got that piece done. Excellent. So now all I need to do is go in and adjust my properties to be what I want. So the color I probably want to be red. Tack down stitch, yes. Color change enable, I probably want to enable the color change there because I'm me and I like to be able to double check things. Then we will go into the properties of my tack down. That looks nice. Let's go ahead and change that corner so it happens a little more frequently. And then let's change the corner of the top stitching. Let's see if I like a cap. No. Let's try a miter. There we go. So that's starting to look about like I want it to look. And if you get this, the way that you like it, and you find out you need to break it apart, you do have that capability. So if you need to right-click on it, go to Operations and go to Convert Object to Wireframe, and it will break it apart into the pieces that make it up. And then you can go in and edit them separately. All right, guys, you now have all the tools you need to digitize Applique very quickly and efficiently using that Applique input method. So take a look at it, give it a shot, sew out a few, and see what works best for you.